Welcome, everyone. We are on. All right. As a reminder, we're in the middle of an essay, which in the lexicon, in the inner circle of the Chabad Lubavitch lexicon, it is called a sicha. A sicha literally would be translated as something to the effect of a talk. This is a talk or compilation of talks by the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach. And after he spoke it, then either shortly thereafter or many years later, he edited his words. It was transcribed by a team of transcribers, and then he thoroughly and completely edited it to the extent that these are his words and he takes full responsibility for what they say. And then subsequently, after enough of those booklets come out every week, they form a book and they go in the order of the Torah reading for the week. So this is in volume 26, which the entire volume is the book of Exodus, and volume 26. And this is the talk, the third one in this book for the weekly Torah portion of Yisro, Jethro. So this is Yisro 3, or C. And it's quite lengthy, very involved, very detailed, especially with the footnotes and references, but even without. We are in the middle. The topic of discussion here is, as I mentioned when we started this talk, it's really geared to the Jewish people. But I think Menoach would benefit a lot, and at the very least find it interesting. And that is, what exactly is the obligation of the Jew towards the Noachide? And why does it seem like it was neglected for so many generations? And why now? And what has changed? Why is the time now? And what has changed? Basically, as we mentioned, in the early 1980s is when officially and formally the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach made a campaign to promote, educate, teach, publicize these 7 Noachide commandments and all that they entail to the entire world, and to fulfill the words of Maimonides, to compel or to influence the nations of the world to keep these 7. So here he's addressing why now, what has changed? Why was this not done until now, for the most part? And again, you're going to find very few isolated, exceptional cases here, there, and somewhere else throughout the past 2,000 years of Jewish history where it has been done. Very, very few exceptional cases. But for the most part, it's fair to say, wasn't done. And last time, I jumped ahead and I shared with you a little bit of a footnote, and that was footnote number 67, where there's a story there, I'll very briefly review, where a great rabbi, he's known by an acronym of his name, the Chidah, that he was traveling, he used to travel a lot, and he met a non-Jew who he was convinced that this person believes in the God of Israel, does not worship anything else. So this great rabbi interrogated him and questioned him in great detail until this great rabbi was truly convinced that this person is sincere and believes in the God of Israel. So this great rabbi told him, instructed him, that he should say the Shema Yisrael every morning and every night. And he accepted that upon himself, and he took upon himself that he's only going to pray to God and to God alone. And he will categorically, absolutely reject what we call shituf, which basically means that there's any mixing or any other intermediate besides the individual praying and to God. And he accepted this and so on. Okay. Now, We're in the middle of what you would call a technical discussion. For those that are not familiar with how it works in the oral study of the tradition, which you really are not supposed to, for the most part, be involved in such study, unless it is related directly to your commandments, which in this case it is. There's the idea of studying something in depth. And people spend their life studying like this. Surely in the primary years, the formative years, in yeshiva, which is the school in which one studies Torah very in depth and intense, and basically throughout your teens, probably when a boy is about 10, 11 years old, and then he progresses and it gets deeper and deeper until he's in the higher school, which would be in his early 20s. During all those years, those 10 plus years, we study in great depth, and you bring down different opinions, which seem to be arguing with each other and contradicting each other, and each one brings a proof to their opinion. And then we have the first way to explain it, and then that is oftentimes refuted. Then we have the second way, and then that's refuted, and this can go on. This is how Talmud works, actually, and then the commentaries on the Talmud. So sometimes you will have an explanation, and it may sound good, but then you come along, either yourself or someone else comes and disproves that and refutes it, and you can have built an entire building, and then all you need to do is destroy the foundation, and the whole thing collapses. And your whole big, beautiful explanation is completely chucked out the window, as we would say. Okay, so in this case, we are studying in depth the words of Maimonides and everything related to that about the non-Jew, the Noahide, and the 7 commandments. We're on page 134. And for the most part, so far, we said that we find different terminology for the non-Jew. There's much more than 3, but in general, at this point, we're saying that there is the Ger Toishav, which would be the highest level of a non-Jew, and we'll soon review in general terms the status of what a Ger Toishav is. Then level number 2, you would have the Ben Noach, the Noachite, which is what you refer to yourselves as, what you are called. And then you have the 3rd and lowest level in this context, and that is the Goy, Stam. Stam means plain, simple. It's a regular Goy, the regular non-Jew. Now, the Ger Toishav, we've mentioned many times, and I pointed out, I think, in the previous class as well, footnote 23, he lists all the places throughout the entire Magni Opus of the Rambam Maimonides, where in his laws, he states where nowadays, meaning when you don't have the Jubilee year in effect, we don't have the legal Ger Toishav. You cannot have a Ger Toishav, according to Maimonides, if you don't have the Yovel, the Jubilee year. And you cannot have the Jubilee year if you don't have all the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. So we listed 4 places where he says that. Sarah, Mila, Shabbos. 4 different places where each one of them seemingly has nothing to do with the other. It comes in each place according to the topic there that's discussed. And he makes the clear statement, almost word for word, the same in all of these 4 places, namely that we're not Mekabel, we, the Jewish people, the court does not accept a Ger Toishav if you don't have the Jubilee year in effect. What is the Ger Toshav? Again, very briefly, it is a non-Jew living in the land of Israel at the time that it's under true Jewish sovereignty, when you have the Jubilee year and you have the court system and the government is all according to Torah law. And this non-Jew, formally in front of the Jewish court, accepts upon himself to keep the 7 Noahide commandments because they were given by God through Moses. If the person does that, that person now has the status of a Ger Toshav, which puts him in a certain halachic framework, and he has a number of rights that a regular non-Jew does not have, and the Jewish people need to treat him in a certain way above and beyond just your average interaction with your fellow man. Certain rights, and in certain ways, Jews treat that person almost as if he'd be a fellow Jew. He's not Jewish, but certain rights that he's given by living in the land of Israel, and the Jewish people are obligated to financially and otherwise support him and assist him in living, and so on and so forth. That is a Ger Toshav. But then the Ben Noach, that there are no conditions for, and literally a Ben Noach is a descendant of Noah, which is all of mankind. But that's the term used for a person who is keeping the 7 Noahide commandments. Okay, now, so if a Ben Noach does not formally accept the 7 in front of a Jewish court, or nowadays, when we don't have the Jubilee year, then he would be a regular Noachide, a Ben Noach. Okay, so let's continue pretty much where we left off. We'll go back a little bit, and we're on page 134, second column, but this time I'm going to try, instead of verbally reading, I'm just going to try to translate and explain. We mentioned the Ragachover. The Ragachover, which we said was a great rabbi who passed away in the 1930s. His name was Rabbi Yosef Rosen, and he was one of the greatest minds of the century, for sure. And he considered himself to be a student of Maimonides, although he lived about 700-800 years after Maimonides. But he directly learned from his books, and he became so one that this became his teacher. And the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach has correspondence with this rabbi, the Ragachover, in a number of instances, and brings them down quite often in his talks. All right, so we're saying like this. From the words of Maimonides of the Rambam, it's understood that the obligation for the Jew to compel, to force all the people of the world is not associated with the ruling that he says that it is proper, the best thing would be ideally for the Noachite to accept it because it's God-given through Moses at Sinai. That's the deal. In order for him to fall into the category of being Chasidei Umay So'ilam, from the righteous or the pious of the nations of the world. One has nothing to do with the other. As a Jew, I am obligated to get everyone to keep these 7. Now, to this point, we introduce what the Ragachover says. That according to Maimonides' approach, there are 2 types. One is the Ger Toshav, which is one who formally accepts it in front of the Jewish court, and that cannot exist nowadays. And then that person has certain rights that the Jewish community is obligated to support the person, etc. Now, since a ben noyach that is not legally and technically a ger toishav, and the Jewish people are obligated to support such a person, we must say that which Maimonides says that Moses has commanded to force the people to accept these commandments because that were commanded for Bnei Noach, and whoever doesn't accept them shall be put to death. He means not specifically acceptance in front of a court of 3 people, a formal acceptance in front of a Jewish court. No. And to become a ger toishav, because that we don't have nowadays, but rather just an acceptance that he has to accept it to keep these 7. And therefore, he then, if he does, he is a ben noyach stam. And that, whether it's in writing or whether it doesn't matter. And the truth is that at this point, what we're saying is it really wouldn't make it any stronger legally if he does accept it in front of 3 Jewish rabbis. That's not the point. The idea is that he should accept it in front of people, accept it between himself, whatever the case is, but he should accept it. And that is really the extent that we want the Jew to get the non-Jew to accept, to keep these 7. And has nothing to do with ger toishav. Now, based on that, that's the way the Rogatchover is reading into the Rambam Maimonides. Based on that, the precision of Maimonides' words, which is always so exact, the order of how he says it, the order of how he places these various different laws, is as follows. First, he says, Moses, our teacher, was commanded by God to compel all of the people of the world to accept the commandments that the Noachites were commanded, and whoever doesn't accept it will be put to death. And one who does accept them is called a ger toishav everywhere, and he needs to accept it in front of 3 chaverim, which we'll say means 3 observant Jews, learned or at least trustworthy observant Jews. Now, the fact that Maimonides says to force them to accept it, and he doesn't conclude right away by saying that, and then they will be ger toishavs or something to that nature, like he does say elsewhere, that implies that the whole idea of accepting it and therefore becoming a ger toishav is a separate topic. It's a separate idea. And it's not a translation or interpretation or a condition in how the Jew has to get the nations of the world and all the people of the world to keep these 7. They're 2 separate things. And apparently, it's very easy to mix them up and to have them cross wires and to actually misunderstand and mislearn the words of Maimonides. And think that, well, we're supposed to get them to become ger toishav. And if our hands are tied and we can't, no fault of our own, because nowadays we cannot accept ger toishav, as Maimonides repeats several times, as we said, well, then we have no choice. We're stuck and we can't do our job. No, not at all. Ger toishav is, so to say, a topic for itself. And we say there is no such thing as ger toishav when you don't have the Jubilee year. So put that aside. Let's not use that terminology. Let's not use that legal aspect. No ger toishav, finished. But that's not the end of the story, though. That lays that to rest in a certain sense. Now, is there still a requirement and an obligation for the Jew to get the non-Jewish world to accept their 7 commandments? And then from the perspective of the Noachite, to actually accept it and to do it, even though we can't give you a certificate that you are a full-fledged, bona fide ger toishav. And the answer is yes, categorically yes. There is an obligation for the Jew, and therefore, of course, is the obligation for every non-Jew to accept the 7 commandments. And the reason why the Jew is commanded to do so, it's not just a commandment that I, the Jew, have to do something, and I need you to do my obligation. It's not like that. There's a goal here. The reason why the Jew is obligated to influence the world to keep these 7 is so that they keep the 7. That's the goal. It's not like, well, I'm supposed to pick up a certain stick. So that stick exists so that I can do my obligation. And if I didn't have that stick, I wouldn't be able to pick it up, and therefore I can't do what I need to do. That's not what it is in this case. Maybe by other commandments, that's how it is for Jews, but not here. There's a purpose, there's a goal, and that is that everybody should keep these 7 laws, accept them, that they're God-given, the divine laws, and keep them. So now who's responsible to bring it to the world and to educate the world? That's the Jew. But the end is that the people should keep them. And nothing to do again with Ger Toshav. And he really makes this very clear, going into a lot of detail, showing how don't mix in this idea. Just because we don't have a Ger Toshav doesn't mean that there's any less of an obligation for the Jew to influence the non-Jew, and therefore for the non-Jew to accept these 7 Noachide commandments. Even nowadays, when we don't have the Jubilee year. So now, he goes on to explain what is the difference between these 2 laws. On the one hand, for the Jew to get everybody, all the Bnei Noach, to keep their laws, accept them and keep them, and Ger Toshav. What's the difference? The fact that, as Maimonides says, that Moses was commanded by God to compel all the people of the world to accept these 7 commandments is a general commandment with regards to whom? All people of the world. Anyone who's not Jewish. All of civilization. And B, it's an obligation upon the Jews that they need to compel the Noachites to accept these commandments. C, the involvement and the efforts of the Jews in fulfilling this obligation, in bringing the Noachites to their commandment, is not really connected with the acceptance of the Noachide. It's not that they need to accept it in front of 3 rabbis or anything like that, or Jewish court. And D, the way they accept it doesn't have to be, it's not that it must be because God commanded it in the Torah. That's ideal, but it's, according to Maimonides, it's definitely better than nothing if they keep these 7 laws because they believe that they were God-given to Adam and to Noah, or just because they make sense. That's also definitely better than nothing. So that's all with regards to the first law, that nothing to do with Ger Toshav. Now, on the other hand, what's the Ger Toshav deal? When it comes to the Ger Toshav, it's only a Ben Noach that wants to accept it. There's no campaign ever to make Ger Toshavs. As opposed to what we're saying now, there is a campaign started back by Sinai, by the giving of the Torah, that the Jewish people are obligated to, I don't want to use the word proselytize, but to proselytize the non-Jewish world to keep their 7 commandments. Not the case when it comes to Ger Toshav. And B, it only works when their acceptance is in front of 3 trustworthy, observant Jews. And C, it must be, for the Ger Toshav, it must be that he's accepting it because they are commanded by God in the Torah. But if he just did it because it makes sense logically, that's not at all a Ger Toshav. It's a Noachide who's keeping his end, that's not a Ger Toshav. In other words, to sum this piece up, the rule, the law of forcing or compelling all the people of the world to accept it is not connected with the law of acceptance. In other words, even though I, as a Jew, am obligated to bring it to the world that they should accept it, but their acceptance is not a condition. No, they don't have to accept it in such a way, such a way, in such a way. It's the point is, we just have a goal over here that they accept it and keep it. It's like, so to say vague, which is fine. Of course, there's the ideal. It's best if, but there's no rules, as is the case by Ger Toshav, on the other hand. All right. So now we move on to explain this a little bit clearer, to develop this concept. We're going to zero in now on one particular word that Maimonides uses. Remember, his choice of words is perfect. Everything in Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, his magnum opus of all of Jewish law, is very perfect, precise. The choice of words, the order of how he says things, what he doesn't say, etc., etc., etc. So he chose a word over here. The Hebrew word that he's using is lakuf or lachoif, which I keep on, jumping back and forth to either translate it as to force or to compel, because it really is a very intense word. It's a really, it doesn't mean to influence. It doesn't mean to try to, or it really means to force. So why does he choose that word? What does he mean with that word? That Moses was commanded by God, lachuf, to force all the people of the world, not to just merely try or make an effort to get everybody to accept them, or any other language like that, but it's really lachuf. So what do we mean with that? What is the point here? So it says like this. When it comes to a Ger Toshav, there is actually a dispute in the Talmud. What is called a Ger Toshav? According to one opinion, Rabbi Meir, a Ger Toshav is anyone who accepted upon himself in front of 3 chaverim, 3 trustworthy, observant Jews, not to worship avodah zara. That's it. That he will not serve idolatry. But according to the chachamim, according to the majority of the rabbis, anyone who accepted upon himself the 7 commandments that the Noachites are commanded. So we have a dispute. Is it just that he has to categorically and officially in front of the court accept not to worship avodah zara, or must it be all 7? And what is the ruling of Maimonides? See, when we have it in the Talmud, a dispute, well, then you have to have Maimonides and others like that who came after the Talmud give you the verdict, the ruling. What do you follow? So how does Maimonides rule in this case? So in a number of places, he rules like the majority, the chachamim, the rabbis, meaning that in order to be a Ger Toshav, it is insufficient to accept upon himself formally in front of the Jewish court not to worship idols or something like that. He has to accept all 7. I think, at least for now, we're going to open up for questions our discussion on what we said so far. And if we have time, then we'll continue today a little further. Anyone have anything that's not clear or they want to share on what we said so far?
Yeah, Rabbi. This is Aaron.
Go ahead.
So, I was in New York maybe about 2 months ago, and I went with my rabbi, and I went to the OL. And I went to the OL because we were praying for the building of my I guess my mission here to work on this community of Noahides in Chicago that we're trying to influence people in the 7 laws. But I'm noticing all of these other groups springing up all over the world right now. And I'm talking about Australia, I'm talking about the Philippines, I'm talking about North Carolina, Chicago, all these different places. And then there's different groups. Now, I've been with Lubavitch now for almost 40 years. And I was listening to some people online who are in these Noahide groups, and they're talking about, how they're not necessarily liking what Lubavitch is doing as far as recruiting or talking to people about the Noahide faith. And my response in my dissertation about it was that's how I came to be a Noahide, because someone from the Lubavitch introduced me to it. And then I learned about the Rebbe, and I learned about the emissaries. And I met, actually, when I was in New York, I actually met the UN representative for the Noahides.
Yeah.
Rabbi
David.
Yes. And I'm realizing that this thing is growing and it's becoming. But I also know that there's factions building in different places all over the place. There are people who want to control groups. They want everybody to go in their particular way with their particular thoughts and stuff like that. And then there are people who want to be personalities, I guess, in the movement. So when we're talking about the Jewish person's responsibility to at least give the non-Jew an understanding of the 7 Noahide laws, there are different ways that people are coming into this that are not the same. So we're seeing that, there's a slight division. But I also understand something about the Jewish community. Not all Jewish groups, Lubavitchers, or the Frum, or whoever, all of them agree with each other all the time or think alike all the time. But the basic premise is there. It's like with the Torah, first we'll do and then we'll understand. So when I became aware of the Noahide laws, I took on the track, first I will do and then I'll understand later, which comes back to something you said a little while ago. But that's based upon my particular way of perceiving. When we're talking about influencing other Noahides, I don't know if there's a specific way to do that. And with that being the case, then you've got these factions that are coming in now. So I'm trying to navigate the idea of what factionalism is in this concept. And I'm done.
So is there a question there, or you just wanted to?
It's a big question, I mean, where are we going with this?
Here, let me sort of back up a little bit, at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As a Jew, I would like to say, a Lubavitcher Chassid, or best to say so, growing, trying to live up to that title. So before we even get to the 7 Noahide commandments, or to the Jews' involvement in a religious way with his non-Jewish neighbors and associates, etc. Basically, from the very beginning of the leadership of this generation, 1950, when the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach became the seventh and final leader of Chabad movement, and as we believe, of world Jewry at the end of exile, leading us into the Messianic era, he started off revolutionizing from day one, no question about that. I don't think that's even arguable. And he started campaigns. And basically, what's called today, the language is outreach. Basically, for a Jew to be concerned and actively be involved in reaching every Jew that he possibly can, and then some, to fulfill their Jewish obligation. And that itself, I can go on literally for hours, as can probably any Lubavitch emissary or rabbi. That's very clear. But again, for the sake of everyone here, let me just touch upon very briefly a couple of examples. One of the worst things is assimilation. For a Jew, man or woman, to marry out of the faith, to marry someone who's not Jewish, doesn't matter how great of a person they are, they could be the greatest Noachide, doesn't matter. A Jew is forbidden big time from marrying a non-Jew. I don't want to go into the numbers. You can look it up yourselves. And it's beyond scary and beyond tragic. Many call it the silent Holocaust. So this generation, and you can look at the years, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and see the unfortunate increase. So the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is fighting this, and the requirement and the obligation of everybody is do whatever you possibly can to stop it, to educate people, to explain to them the tragedy and why you can't just marry the very fine, nice, beautiful person that you, to use the Western lingo, fell in love with, whatever that means. Okay. But then, practically speaking, over the years, he made what became a 10-point mitzvah campaign. And these 10 commandments are the entranceway to get the Jew to become fully observant. And some of them are tefillin. The Jewish men and boys from age 13, that they should put on tefillin. And tefillin are these black boxes that every Jewish man and boy is supposed to put on 6 days a week on his arm and on his head, every day, except for Shabbos. So he made a campaign. And since then, you will find that Lubavitch goes around with a pair of tefillin, and every opportunity we stop a person, excuse me, sir, are you Jewish? Did you put on tefillin yet today? Would you like to put on tefillin? It will take 1 minute. Let's go, roll up your left sleeve, and boom, 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 boom. Repeat after me. 60 seconds later, they're off. He's done. He did a great mitzvah. Okay? And again, I can go on and on and on and talk about the importance of that and why that. I'm not going to do that. Another one, Shabbos candles for Jewish women and girls of age 3 and up. Married women, light 2 candles. A single girl or woman, 1 candle. Every single Friday at the proper time, before sunset. And that's how we usher in the Holy Shabbos. In a campaign, get every Jewish woman and girl to light the Shabbos candles. Okay? And then there's another 8 campaigns. And basically, what he's doing, and he speaks about all of these things in general and in particular, with tremendous passion and conviction. And the point is to get the Jewish world to be observant. We're not looking for converts. We're not looking to get we're looking for Jews to behave Jewishly. There's a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, but he has obligations. No matter what he does or doesn't do, he's just as Jewish. The most observant religious person and the most irreligious Jew I'm talking about, they're just as Jewish, but you have an obligation, what you are supposed to do. There's do's and don'ts. Okay, so that's all where I'm coming from. And he has trained us, has educated us as his followers with the urgency that therefore I'm very driven. We are very driven. And it's to the extent, I don't even know if you'll be able to relate to this, it's to the extent that a Lubavitcher, which means a Jew that is a follower openly of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, he feels that he has this obligation, this mission, that anytime I meet a Jew, I need to take care of whatever I can in his Jewish life. I need to mind his business. Get him his zuzas, the scroll that goes on the door, and everything. But how do you go about doing that? Well, sometimes you don't see the success. If you're going to measure success in what did they start doing right away because I spoke to them. But I don't give up. And not this time, maybe next time, or the time after. But I'm driven, and my goal is to get every Jew that I can reach to become observant and keep the laws that I and he equally have to keep. Okay, now let's move into our topic. The Noachide. Same thing. Especially that he's using the words of Maimonides, lakuf, to force. So now, after all these talks, and he speaks about it again and again and again, about the importance and the obligation and the merit, but it's an obligation of the Jew to get the non-Jewish world and the non-Jews to keep them. So now how do you go about doing that? Just like with his campaigns for Jews. That's for us to figure out. And you have to think, whether it's in a way of commercializing or PR, whatever those terms are, but to think, how can I influence the people? And now, I'm not only driven when I see a Jew, I start thinking, mitzvahs, got to get him to do this, 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 this. Now, when I see a human being that's not Jewish, anybody, I start thinking, okay, how do I teach him about the 7 Noachide commandments? Now, practically, I may not end up saying anything to the person about it in our interaction. That's just because either it's my shortcoming, or I'm lazy, or I have fear, or whatever it may be, or I don't see how right now I can get to it, but it's still something on the forefront of my mind. So whether it's to put up billboards, just get the person to think, and then he's going to go to that website and get educated, or whether it's to give out cards, which have a number or website, whatever it may be, to start off the initial process. But now the idea is that there's an obligation for everyone to influence everyone else. And when we say force, we obviously don't mean by threats or gunpoint or anything of that nature. Sometimes, parenthetically, if let's say you're intellectually debating a certain subject, certain concept, anything, it doesn't even have to be religion, academia, and you're having a debate in university, and each one has to try to argue a certain point. If you intellectually bring better logical proofs, and rationally speaking, you defeated that person, and your debate and your argument is on an intellectual level. I'm not talking about that, somebody is just going with whatever, they're not thinking, or they say, don't confuse me with the facts. We're talking about that it's clearly and strictly intellectual. There's rules of how to debate. Well, then when you win the debate, you forced him to accept your philosophy. Now, what do you mean you forced him? Intellectually. That's one way of forcing. And there are other ways as well. But again, peaceful ways. For example, if there's ill feelings between two individuals and one of them wants to make peace with the other, but it's just became so difficult. If one individual truly showers the other person with love, they're constantly expressing it in so many different ways. At the end, as we all know, sooner or later, the ice will break and that person will not be able to be resistant and the closeness will come back. So that's also forcing, but it's forcing with love. For instance, it says that when God offered the Torah to the Jewish people, so allegorically speaking, not literally, says that God picked up the mountain, uprooted the mountain, picked it up, and held it over the Jewish nation. And he asked them, will you accept my Torah or not? If you accept it, wonderful. If not, I drop the mountain and you will all be buried right here. And lo and behold, they all said, yes, of course we accept the Torah. The obvious question is obvious. So Chassidus explains, it's not that he took the mountain and threatened them. That whole story is presented such. What was it? It was, and explains the details, why a mountain, why on top of them, and all that. Not going to get into that. It was that God showed us such enormous divine love, we couldn't resist. At that point, we had no choice. When God is so open and so revealed and so loving, you can't say, no, I reject. That's also a form of force. All right? So
the thing is that when we're talking about the communications about the actual ideas.
Yes.
In the Jewish community, when you said earlier that you debate things, you sit down and you talk them over, you have these questions that you ask about all the things. Now, when the Noahides are forming, and you're teaching us to look at things from these critical perspectives, and we start forming groups like that, isn't it our responsibility to create something for that particular purpose for us to do those things?
I'm not sure. Not necessarily.
I mean, aren't we supposed to become scholars of what we're learning as well?
Yes, that's true. And therefore, if you're going to go into that type of depth in this part of the Torah, so it makes sense that like the yeshiva of Shem and Aver and whatever, that the yeshiva, and if you ever walk into a yeshiva, a Jewish yeshiva, I mean, first time you walk into such a place, you're like blown away. Say, are these people going to get violent any moment? I mean, it's like really scary if you're not brought up in that culture, screaming and yelling at each other. And they look so passionate and so vicious. And really, it's out of love. It's to the so if you want to make yeshivas like that for Noachides, it'd be a beautiful thing. I'm just not so sure that type of debating and studying is in the blood of most people.
Well, I'm not necessarily going down that vein with this. What I'm looking at is like you got Ask Noah, you have these other groups, and these are groups from that are the people who manage the things in these groups are Lubavitchers. So they're teaching us these particular kinds of things.
Right.
they're kind of regulating groups. But after we get past what they've shown us, then we're living out here in these communities. We have to make a decision on how we present what we believe in, because when people ask us, we got to be able to answer all the questions and stuff like that. So we should be having our own yeshivas. We should be having our own learning centers. But I don't want to sit up and take a group who's following some group over in Israel, and they don't agree with what the Lubavitchers have to say. And all of a sudden, we've got a conflict with each other. I've learned. That's why I brought up the fact that I learned everything that I've learned through the Lubavitch, not through anyone else. So when other people come with, like say if they recognize a personality, I've never seen the Lubavitch recognize personalities for who should be we should all look up to. But some of these other groups, I'm seeing them do that. So when we're learning and stuff like that, I think that somewhere along the line, there's got to be, some kind of a common meeting ground for us. But we have to first start somewhere, right? Where we build our own communities.
I'm not sure that it has to be so. That might be a good idea, a good way, but I'm not sure that it has to be so. As long as we're clear about the goal, and the goal is that everybody should keep the 7 Noahide commandments. Now the question is, how do you get to everybody, and how do you influence and educate everybody? Okay, so then that's, whatever works. And it may not be one size fits all. In one country or one community, it may take on this form, and another place may take on a different form.
That was my big question. That was the answer I wanted to hear. Will it take on different forms? And I mean, they don't all have to be standard, or no one group is going to come up and say, okay, we all believe this, so now the rest of you guys got to believe this. I mean, we do have some kind of autonomy in our faith, so we don't have leadership, right?
Well, I'm not sure I would put it that way, because ultimately, any question or any doubt, which there's so many of them, legally I'm talking about, not philosophically, primarily legally, in action, you have to go back, and there has to be an authority which needs to be a Jew that's well-versed in this area. See, amongst Jewish rabbis, some people, their expertise is a certain area. Not that they're ignorant in the other areas, but this particular area, whether for one person it's the laws of keeping Shabbos, that's his expertise. For another one, it's the laws of ritual slaughtering and kosher. For a third, it's a third area, and so on. So you need to have a rabbi who's actually studied in depth, and he is on the level that he can give a ruling. And then that's the one that one or individuals, doesn't have to be one person, but that you ultimately go back to. So today, whether it's Ask Noah, whether it's the Divine Code, Rabbi Weiner, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, when a question comes up, which inevitably they do, especially if you're becoming observant and it's not just theoretical, so then the question comes up, all right, can I do this or can I not? Whatever the question may be, from something which we may call silly, but to the person at the time, I want to do the right thing. Nothing is silly. Choose some serious things. Silly, and again, forgive me for saying silly, but for example, if someone says, am I allowed to participate in fireworks on the 4th of July? And, I don't know. So for some of us, the answer might be very obvious and very simple. The guy doesn't know. He's learning what it says, and he has a question. So someone's got to be able to take the authority of answering that question. And then to go on to very serious stuff would be things, for example, of abortion. If they say that it's endangering the mother's life, so do we just say, yeah, sure, abort the baby? We're talking about life and death. And you have to be able to know that at times, yes, we do say to abort. unlike others where they just say, no, abortion is murder, never, ever, ever. That's not the Torah standpoint. It may be the general, but then there are particulars, and there clearly are exceptions where abortion is a must. So who's going to take the responsibility? You're talking literally about life and death. So serious things like that. So it can't just be debated amongst intelligent, learned Noachites. That's my point.
Once a Noahide learns what you just said, like we learn that how this operates, that there are permissible times for abortions and things like that. Can he translate that to another Noahide without having to have another rabbi sitting there?
That's a very good question. And I have my personal feeling and understanding, and I have a very strong opinion about it, but I may be wrong. That's a very good question. And my personal understanding is that at the end of the day, it has to be a Jewish rabbi who's going to give that ruling. Even though the rabbis taught the Noachites, and the Noachite is very intelligent and he's teaching others. But when it comes to actually giving a ruling on something really serious, my understanding is that it has to be like in the olden days, the Beis Din, the Jewish court. So too now, even though it's not Ger Toshav, but it's as far as what to do. That's how I understand.
Okay, I'm gonna stop now. Let someone else get a question.
All right, buddy. As you see, it's a very when you get into it, it's a very hot topic. When you get practical, Aaron's very practical. He wants to, let's make the world the way it's supposed to be. What does that mean? What do we do? It'd be beautiful if we could just snap our fingers. Okay, now everyone's on board. How do you get to that point? Well, what do you do? And there may not be one correct answer. There may be lots of things that we're not allowed to do, and there may be a lot of things that are wrong. But what's right? There could be a lot of things which are right, and do it your way as long as it's within the framework and it is towards the goal of what needs to be accomplished. Anyone else? All right.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to add, it's just an observation that, I think if you're becoming an Noahide, it might be frustrating to see that there are ranges of opinions on how you could behave. So, for example, a rabbi will say, no, you cannot observe the Sabbath. And there's an extreme rabbi that will say, yes, you can just light a candle, just light something, or just violate it just a bit, but you can practice it. So I guess it's one thing that we could condition new Noahides is to be comfortable with this kind of spectrum of opinions, so that it may not frustrate them. Yep.
That's a good piece of advice, but at the end of the day, unless you are following a very particular route, it could really be very frustrating. You want to do the right thing, and what are you supposed to do? That's true. But you do your best, and again, the safest thing would be to follow an authority, and then who's to say who's the authority? So that's what you run into. Yeah.
Nick's got his hand up.
Yes.
You mentioned something before about delving too deeply into Torah study for a Noahide. What would that entail exactly?
That's a good point. And let me first say the legal official wording before we try to interpret it. it is forbidden for any non-Jew to be oisek, to be involved in the study of Torah. Period. And then it says that anything which is related to their mitzvahs, to the 7 commandments, and including all of the offshoots and what branches off into, they can study. That's the statement, that's the fact. Now, speaking just like the comment we just had before, that one person will tell you, stay away from Shabbat completely, you can't keep Shabbos because it does say the same thing. And another one will say, no, you can keep Shabbat, just make sure to transgress it once during the 24 hours of Shabbat, just strike a match and then you didn't keep Shabbos. So similarly, in a certain sense, when it comes to Torah study, everyone agrees with the statement I just made. The question is practically, to what extent? But really, it's Torah study for the sake of keeping the 7 commandments, which includes belief in God, which once you say that like really opens up a tremendous amount, especially in Hasidus. What you can't do is open up randomly a section of Talmud and say, I want to study Talmud. Why? Well, I heard there's this thing called the Daf Yomi that they do a page a day. And no, you can't do it like that. Or let's say a person says, I want to get into all the details of the blessings that are made on various different foods. I think that's problematic, even though some Noachites would argue and say, what do you mean? I can pray, I want to make the blessings, I want to make the right blessings, and therefore I want to get into all these details. Now, Shabbos is kind of tricky because a non-Jew is forbidden to keep Shabbos. However, much of Shabbos laws involves, from the Jewish perspective, from the Jew telling the non-Jew or allowing the non-Jew to do something for him. So that seemingly would be very appropriate for the non-Jew to know what can he do, what can't he do for the Jew on Shabbos. So it does, practically speaking, it gets, for many of us, kind of sticky or gray. But there still is the black and white part where this is definitely permitted and encouraged, and this is definitely out of bounds. It's just the other 90% that we're talking about, or so.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. So next week, I think we're going to have the class, but I'm not 100% sure if we will. We'll try to let you know sooner than the last minute if we cancel. But as of now, we are on for next week as usual, but that might change.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. All the best, everyone.
Yeah.
Look
Good night,
forward-
Rabbi. Good
Look
night.
forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Rabbi.